They were the biggest American rock band at the dawn of the 70s. In just 4 years, they released more hits than most artists do in a lifetime. Their sound was unmistakable, their rise unstoppable. But at the peak of their fame, something shattered. What started as a brotherhood ended in betrayal, lawsuits, and decades of silence. Today, we uncover the truth behind the fall of Creedence Clearwater Revival. This is the story of how the music survived but the band did not. They were not legends yet, just 4 kids in Cerrito, California, drawn together by their love of rhythm and vinyl. In 1959, long before fame or failure, John Fogerty, Doug Clifford, and Stu Cook formed a modest trio called the Blue Velvets. Their sound was raw, their equipment cheap, but their passion was real. They rehearsed in garages, taped songs onto rudimentary recorders, and imagined stages far bigger than their school gym. John's older brother, Tom Fogerty, soon joined, bringing experience and a sense of ambition. With him, the band gained momentum, playing local dances, house parties, and school events. The songs were mostly covers, but something about their chemistry stood out. Even in these early days, John's drive and musical instincts began to take shape. He was young, quiet, but had a vision already forming deep within him. Despite their local popularity, success eluded them. Their first singles barely made a ripple, and the industry's doors stayed closed. In 1964, a small record label, Fantasy Records, offered them a deal, but it came at a cost. Without consulting them, the label changed their name to the Golliwogs. The new name felt artificial and disconnected from who they were, but they accepted it, hungry for any opportunity to move forward. The Golliwogs era brought frustration. They released several singles, none of which gained serious traction. John, Doug, Stu, and Tom juggled day jobs and military commitments, while the dream of a breakthrough drifted further away. Each failed record chipped away at their confidence, but also hardened their resolve. During this time, John was writing constantly, experimenting with guitar tones, and building a musical vocabulary that would later define their sound. By the time 1967 arrived, the boys were no longer boys. They were seasoned, disappointed, and at a crossroads. But that frustration forged something rare: unity. They had tasted how ruthless the industry could be. They had seen how control could slip away. And now, they were ready to reclaim their music, their name, and their future. The rebirth was coming. They just didn't know yet how big it would be. It was December 24th, 1967, Christmas Eve, when everything changed. Fantasy Records was sold, and with that shift came a spark of freedom. Saul Zaentz, the new owner, granted them something they had never had before: the right to choose. And so, they did. They shed the awkward label of the Golliwogs and named themselves Creedence Clearwater Revival. The choice was symbolic. Creedence came from a friend, Clearwater from a beer ad, and Revival because they were starting over. With their new identity came new clarity. John Fogerty stepped into full command. He was no longer just the guitarist or a co-writer. He became the band's nucleus. He wrote the songs, sang them, produced the recordings, and crafted their sound. And when their self-titled debut album arrived in 1968, it marked the start of something completely different. One of its tracks, Susie Q, became a nationwide hit. For the first time, the public heard that swampy, Southern-influenced sound that didn't quite match their Bay Area roots. Then came 1969, the year that transformed them into a phenomenon. In that single year, they released Bayou Country, Green River, and Willie and the Poor Boys, each one packed with hits. Proud Mary, Bad Moon Rising, Green River, Down on the Corner songs that became instant classics. Their success wasn't slow or steady, it was explosive, and it felt unstoppable. Touring nonstop, Creedence turned into a performance machine. They played tight, no-nonsense sets with none of the psychedelic meandering that other bands favored. While others jammed, Creedence delivered sharp, disciplined songs that echoed American stories: working class, rural, defiant. They weren't flashy. They weren't political in speeches. But their music hit with the force of cultural truth. By the end of 1969, Creedence Clearwater Revival had outsold even the Beatles in the United States. They had become the biggest American band of their time, and they had done it on their own terms: no gimmicks, no studio tricks, just pure songwriting power. But behind that rise, pressure began to build. Creative control, internal tension, and financial contracts were tightening like a noose. The next chapter would bring cracks, and eventually, collapse. By 1970, Creedence Clearwater Revival was standing at the very top of American rock. They had sold millions of records, filled stadiums, and released back-to-back hits. But while the public celebrated their music, inside the band, things were beginning to collapse. John Fogerty had taken complete control of the creative process. He wrote every song, arranged every part, and directed every sound in the studio. For a while, this intensity worked. Their albums were sharp, their sound unmistakable, but cracks were forming beneath the surface. Cosmo's Factory, their fifth studio album, became a colossal success. Up Around the Bend, Run Through the Jungle, Who'll Stop the Rain, each track was a reflection of John's perfectionist grip. He didn't just want a good record, he wanted the exact sound in his head to come out of the speakers. He often played bass lines himself, corrected drum takes, and rejected suggestions from the others outright. What was once collaboration turned into instruction, and resentment started to grow. Doug Clifford and Stu Cook were not just supporting musicians. They had been there from the beginning, playing school dances, recording failed singles, and driving beat-up vans through small-town tours. But now, they felt increasingly like they were simply hired hands in the John Fogerty Band. The rehearsals were long, the sessions tense, and John's mood was always on edge. The stress of meeting his own standards had transformed him into a leader no one dared challenge. Even the live shows, once a place of shared adrenaline, became a performance of obligation. Fans roared with joy, but backstage was a different world. Fights erupted over decisions no longer made as a group setlist, studio takes, even press photos were now John's call. He wanted control not just over the music, but over the image and message. And the others, growing increasingly frustrated, saw no way in. The moment of fracture wasn't a single blow. It was slow erosion, trust dissolving under the weight of creative imbalance. The unity that had powered their rise now seemed like a faded illusion. Creedence was still climbing the charts, but inside they were drifting, and the tighter John held on, the more the band began to slip away. Can success survive when trust breaks down? For Tom Fogerty, the situation had become unbearable. He had watched his younger brother seize full control of the band they built together. Once a co-leader, Tom now stood in John's shadow, his guitar parts reduced, his voice silenced. In February 1971, he made a quiet but seismic decision. He left Creedence Clearwater Revival for good. It wasn't just a career move. It was a personal rupture, the breaking of a bond that had defined both their lives. Tom's departure didn't cause a media storm. He offered no public complaints, gave no dramatic interviews, but the silence said enough. Inside the band, the news landed like a gut punch. Without Tom, they were no longer the original four. And the loss wasn't just musical, it was symbolic. The dream born in a California garage had lost one of its founders. The band continued, but the energy had changed. In response, John did something no one expected. He announced that, From now on, all members would contribute equally, writing, singing, performing. It sounded democratic, even noble. But to Stu Cook and Doug Clifford, it felt like punishment. John was stepping back, not to share power, but to watch them fail. The result was Mardi Gras, the band's final studio album and its weakest. Without John's full involvement, the music sounded fragmented. The band didn't gel. There was no cohesion, no fire. The reviews were brutal. Critics called the album a mess, an experiment gone wrong, and a band falling apart in real time. Fans were just as disappointed. The songs lacked direction, and the absence of unity was obvious to anyone who had followed the band's meteoric rise. What once sounded effortless now felt forced, and the public knew Creedence had lost its soul. They went on tour one last time in 1972, but the spark was gone. The backstage fights were colder now, less emotional, more resigned. By October of that year, it was over. Creedence Clearwater Revival officially disbanded, ending a chapter of American rock that had burned bright and then burned out. The band that once moved as one voice had shattered, and the silence that followed spoke louder than any record. The story of Creedence Clearwater Revival did not end when the music stopped. In fact, what followed was even more painful than the band's breakup. John Fogerty spent the next 4 decades locked in one of the most bitter legal and emotional battles in rock history, not with his former bandmates, but with the company that had owned their music from the beginning. While the world sang along to Fortunate Son and Bad Moon Rising, John was fighting to reclaim his own voice. Fantasy Records, the label that signed them as teenagers, had secured contracts that gave them ownership over every Creedence song. When Saul Zaentz took over the company, he became both gatekeeper and adversary. John's song she's life's work were now controlled by someone else. Every time a Creedence track played on the radio or in a film, John received a reminder that his art was no longer his. And the bitterness only deepened with time. In the mid-1980s, John tried to move on. He released Centerfield, a solo album that marked his triumphant return to music. But the shadows of the past followed him. Fantasy Records sued him for plagiarizing himself, claiming that one of his new songs sounded too similar to a Creedence track he had written. It was an absurd accusation, yet one with very real consequences. In court, John took the stand with a guitar in hand and played both songs, proving they were different, proving he was not stealing, just creating in his own style. He won, but the cost was heavy. Lawsuits continued to pile up. Saul Zaentz, now emboldened, sued John for defamation over lyrics that referenced betrayal and injustice. John countersued, demanding that his legal expenses be covered. The courtroom became his second stage, but unlike music, there was no applause, only endless bitterness. Meanwhile, the other former members tried to preserve the music. Stu Cook and Doug Clifford formed Creedence Clearwater Revisited and began touring. John refused to join them. The wounds were still too fresh. And when the band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993, John declined to perform with them, delivering his set back by other musicians. That moment, meant to be a celebration, became a symbol of the band's deep, permanent fracture. As the years passed, the silence between the members grew colder. Tom Fogerty died in 1990 from complications after a medical procedure. He and John never reconciled. What began as a teenage dream ended in estrangement, lawsuits, and unspoken words. The legacy of Creedence was still alive in the music, but behind those iconic songs were 4 men who could no longer share a room. Would you fight decades to reclaim your music? For decades, John Fogerty refused to perform Creedence songs. Not out of pride but pain, every note reminded him of what he had lost: creative control, friendship, and trust. The music belonged to the world, but not to him, so he stayed silent, while fans begged to hear the anthems that had defined a generation. Then, quietly, things began to change. In 2004, Fantasy Records changed ownership. The old walls started to come down. John began reintroducing Creedence songs into his setlist Shezadin at first, but with growing confidence. Each performance felt like a small reclamation of identity, a way to honor the music without reopening old wounds. The turning point came in January 2023. After decades of legal fights, emotional distance, and buried trauma, John Fogerty bought back the publishing rights to his songs. The catalog that once slipped through his fingers was finally in his hands again. It wasn't just about ownership, it was about dignity, healing, and respect. For the first time since the 70s, he didn't have to ask permission to play his own story. John celebrated not with anger, but with gratitude. He re-recorded some of his classics, infusing them with maturity, experience, and yes, peace. He was no longer the young man screaming over injustice, but a survivor reclaiming what was his. Fans heard familiar chords, but the voice behind them now carried decades of life and redemption. Creedence Clearwater Revival never reunited. The scars ran too deep. But in a way, the music found its way home. John Fogerty's journey wasn't just about reclaiming Songsit, it was about confronting the past and finding the strength to move forward. The war was long, but the ending, at last, was his to write. Creedence Clearwater Revival lit a fire that never truly went out. Their rise was meteoric, their sound unforgettable, but behind the music lay years of struggle, betrayal, and silence. John Fogerty's long battle was not just legal, it was personal, emotional, and deeply human. And when he finally regained his songs, it wasn't just about rights, it was about freedom. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard and remembered, subscribe now and keep the music alive, because behind every great band, there's a story that demands to be told.